Catholic Charities USA, Catholic Relief Services, and the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Migration Refugee Services. From the perspective of these three agencies leading the campaign in the U.S., it's been exciting and really gratifying to see the strong levels of support and activity already mobilizing around the campaign by bishops, Catholic Charities agencies, parishes, schools, universities, and many other individual and institutional supporters. My name is Jim Koo. I'm the Catholic Charities USA's Senior Director for Immigration and Refugee Services, and it's my privilege today to facilitate the webinar. This webinar is part of the annual National Migration Observance established by the U.S. bishops several decades ago to call attention to the plight and contributions of migrants and refugees, which, as we all know, is needed now more than ever. This webinar is going to be recorded and will be posted to the CCUSA members only portal and sent to all the registrants via email following the presentations. You can also access the presentations through the handout deck on the GoToWebinar platform. This webinar itself will be scheduled for an hour, and there will be an additional half hour allotted for questions and answers afterwards for those who may wish to ask questions and stay on a little bit longer. You can submit questions at any time during the presentation, either through the platform's chat function, or you can click on the raise your hand option. Before I introduce the distinguished speakers that we have today, let me just offer a few introductory comments, if I may. More than any other institution, the Catholic Church has been at the forefront of welcoming newcomers since our nation's founding and incorporating them into the life of the community, primarily through its parishes, which currently number over 16,000 here in the United States. The call to hospitality is deeply rooted in Scripture and tradition in both the Old and New Testaments, and in Catholic social teaching. Pope Francis has made the treatment of migrants and refugees a focal point of his pontificate. He has spoken out against the culture of indifference and has instead called for a culture of encounter to break down walls and dispel the fear and suspicions that, as we all see, is so prevalent in our current environment. So this two-year Share the Journey global migration campaign that the Pope launched last September under the auspices of Caritas Internationalis is really a practical manifestation of the Holy Father's desire to humanize migrants and refugees and to affirm their inherent dignity through telling compelling stories in particular, and in so doing transform the hearts and minds, first and foremost Catholics, and then others of goodwill who are open to this message. And in fact, in his World Day of Migrants and Refugee Day message for 2018, he introduced the four pillars of welcoming, protecting, promoting, and integrating migrants and refugees by receiving nations and communities. The 65 million persons displaced from their homes worldwide due to persecution, conflict, war, famine, climate change, and other factors is the most in recorded history. And about a third of those forced to flee are refugees. There's really virtually no nation on earth that's not been impacted by this phenomenon in some way, with some countries having to bear an inordinate burden. In fact, 10 countries host 60% of the world's refugees, and 90% of refugees are hosted in the developing world. That's a pretty staggering statistic if you think about it. With that as our backdrop, then let me welcome our presenters, especially the bishops who have joined us today. The presenters will offer their thoughts and reflections on the campaign and highlight how it is coming to life in their particular dioceses. Our presenters include from the Archdiocese of Boston, Debbie Rambo, the President and CEO of Catholic Charities, and Margine Perhat, Director of Immigration and Refugee Services of Catholic Charities. From the Archdiocese of Louisville, His Excellency Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, and Deacon Lucio Caruso, Director of Mission Integration for Catholic Charities. And from the Diocese of San Diego, His Excellency Bishop John Dolan, Dr. Robert Moser, Executive Director of Catholic Charities, Aida Bustos, Associate Director of Media Relations, Diocese of San Diego, Nadine Topozada, Director of Refugee Services, Catholic Charities, and Maria Arroyo, Relationship Manager with Catholic Relief Services West. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Debbie to get us started.
Jim, thank you very much, and thank you for organizing us all today for this very important and given the news today, very timely topic. And though Cardinal Sean could not be with us today, he sends his best wishes, and we at Catholic Charities are very grateful for his support and partnership in this effort. We divided our presentation into sort of three distinct areas: prayer and worship, communications, and education, advocacy, and training. So I'm going to go ahead and just get us started. The prayer and worship pieces of this are bigger than what we have on the screen here for you, but Cardinal Sean has been very active in celebrating masses around the campaign. He opened on September 7th with Mass at St. Mary's Church in Lynn. Lynn is a very diverse community in Boston, and I've got to say there were people of all ethnicities and lots of different garments and people representing many countries at the Mass, so it was wonderful. We also in Boston partner with Catholic Relief Services. We were one of the pilot projects for the Parish Ambassador Corps, and so we, together with one of our parish ambassador parishes, St. Cecilia's in Boston, offered an opportunity for a prayer vigil, which I think people found quite impactful. The Red Mass, which Cardinal O'Malley celebrates regularly, was themed around immigration this year. And he also traditionally celebrates Haitian Independence Day with the Haitian community in Boston. It's the fourth largest Haitian community in the country. And so he happily does that every year. And then just this week, the Feast of the Epiphany, he celebrated at St. Peter Parish with the Cape Verdean community. We run a large teen center after-school program, which is an outreach into the Cape Verdean community. More than 400 teens come to that program every day. So we're very happy to have Cardinal O'Malley there. Make a little bit of a shift to the communications. I've got to say, Cardinal Sean is quite active on the communication side, but we did mount in our on our own website a landing page focused around Share the Journey. So this is just a screenshot of the page that has basic information. The second slide next, Fanny, shows just the extension of the page. We have resources available for people also in Spanish, and it details some of the work that we do that Marjean's going to talk about a little bit later as well. We could go on to social media. Lots of folks saw the open arms welcoming message of Share the Journey, as Cardinal Sean did. That second picture is him with the school children at the Mass at St. Mary's, the opening Mass. Cardinal Sean has 48,000 plus Twitter followers. So anytime he's online is a good thing. Lots of people are hearing his message. And the next slide basically shows a sampling of some of the messaging that's gone out both from Cardinal Sean and from Catholic Charities about the campaign and about its importance and about our activities. So we have, in the next slide, you'll see some of our Facebook posts around the Share the Journey. We are trying really hard to keep this up front in our social media landscape. The next slide has some other samples of the slides that we have, and you can also see that we borrow heavily from our partners at CRS and from the Justice for Immigrants Share the Journey campaign material, so that we are really using everybody's material here because it's really beautifully done, and it just strengthens the campaign, I think. The slide on the left is actually a photo that accompanies an article that was done in print media, the Catholic newspaper in Boston, The Pilot, and talked about the Power program and one of the families that we have been serving through that. Marjean's going to speak to Power a little bit later in the presentation. In the next slide, you'll see we did a panel presentation around our social justice convocation. The Archdiocese of Boston has been lucky to have had 8 consecutive years of social justice convening, and this year's theme was around sharing the journey. So Marjean, who was heavily involved in that, again, is going to speak a little bit later. In the next slide, you'll see the posts that we put up on our Facebook and Twitter feeds for National Migration Week. As you can see, Pope Francis quote there. And the other thing that we have done is we've intermingled the campaign with campaigns around TPS and DACA. So you'll see some sample tweets there. I don't want to forget the traditional media. We've been in print, in television, and on radio. WGBH, which is the National Public Radio Station in Boston, the Pilot. We've been guests on local TV shows and thought leadership. The Cardinal also has written a couple of op-eds, one before the campaign actually started with State Attorney General Maura Healey, focused on the Dreamers. And so we've been very, very active in those campaigns and using media, social media, and traditional media in all those efforts. I'm going to let Margine go next. And Margine probably won't say this out loud, but she actually serves on the Governor's Advisory Council for Refugees and Immigrants here in Massachusetts. So we're delighted to have such an expert represent us in these very important issues. Margine.
Well, thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Jim, and all again for having us. And we're very blessed to have Debbie's wonderful leadership on the Share the Journey campaign for us here in Boston. So I wanted to share with you a little bit more about what Debbie mentioned with our Justice Convocation. And you see here in front of you two pictures from the convocation. I'll kind of give those some more detail. So this convocation is something we feel is very special here in the Archdiocese. It's been going on for 9 years, and this year the theme was caring for our refugees and immigrants, which of course fits beautifully with Pope Francis' Share the Journey campaign. The event is about a half-day event and featured keynote addresses by Sean Callahan, President and CEO of Catholic Relief Services, and Father J. Brian Hare, who's our Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Services of the Archdiocese. Cardinal Sean was also on hand to give some very inspiring remarks to the group. There was an extended networking session and the Catholic Charities panel, which I'll explain a little more in detail. And the event concluded with Mass celebrated by Father Hare. The event is usually held in a pretty easy to access location, which can be challenging here in Boston. So we try to look for a middle ground meeting place for people coming from north, south, and west. There's about over 400 people came this year, and it was very well attended. We were very pleased with that. So our role at Catholic Charities was to organize the panel discussion. And we wanted to give a national, state, and personal perspective on immigrant issues facing our brothers and sisters who are immigrants and refugees. For our panel, we convened a DACA recipient from Guatemala, a Haitian high school student with TPS who arrived after the earthquake, of which we know today is the anniversary of the horrific and devastating earthquake in Haiti. We had Jill Marie Bussey from the clinic, which you probably know is Catholic Legal Immigration Network, Inc. She's the Director of Advocacy, and she kindly came down to give us a federal overview of policy at the federal level that's affecting refugees and immigrants. And we had a parishioner who was participating in our Power program, which had just welcomed a refugee family from Sudan. And in fact, that family was the one you just saw on the previous slide. So we also, as part of the panel discussion, talked about the reversal of the nation's tradition of welcoming refugees. And we called upon the participants in the audience. And to say a bit about the participants, many of them were coming from suburban parishes, very social justice minded and oriented, but maybe not as well versed on refugee and immigrant issues. And a lot of them really came to learn more. Our two client speakers, who of course stole the show, and they were the two gentlemen standing with Cardinal Sean in the slide that you saw before. They each explained how having a form of temporary legal status, whether it's DACA or TPS, has made such a significant impact in their lives. You know, they've been allowed to go to college, have a job, and help financially support their families. What I found interesting is both had said that they felt American, and they didn't consider anywhere else but the United States their home. And I think that was very important for this audience to understand and to see in the flesh two young people who are very heavily impacted by these decisions on immigration policy. So we were very intentional about wanting to offer the participants action steps after the panel. We did this in the form of advocacy cards. So small index-sized cards that we had written 3 different asks of our senators and representatives, and we offered folks the chance to sign their name on one side of the card and then put their address. And so we had cards for each of our senators from Massachusetts and people's representatives. And what was really surprising at the end of the event, we only had 15 cards out of 750 that remained unsigned. So we felt that people really resonated with this activity, and it gave us a good chance to talk about these important legislative priorities. And then we also invited our POWER partners, which is the parishes organized to welcome refugees, to table at the event. And it was very interesting because they had so many banners and posters and pictures that there was actually no room for our table materials at the event. So they were excellent ambassadors for refugees, and they shared their experiences. And you know, a bit about the POWER program is it's an opportunity for a parish to truly live out the social justice mission of welcoming the newcomers. So we asked parishes to work with our refugee resettlement program and provide about A to Z for refugees. And they do an amazing job and really report having such a faith-filled experience. So that was just a little bit about our convocation, which we are very proud of because we felt that it was a very good opportunity to, you know, dispel myths about refugees and immigrants and give folks facts, and also remind of our faith tradition, which is rooted in serving the newcomer. And then one other opportunity that we do have is another education and training opportunity through some very generous funding from Combined Jewish Philanthropies. We were able to hire an immigration attorney to go into parishes and other faith communities and schools and wherever to do legal immigration workshops on different topics like DACA or TPS, and talk about people's rights. And while we might not always say this is, you know, we're doing this and sharing the journey, it's very much in line with what we're trying to do on this campaign, which is, you know, bring out of the shadows immigrants and refugees and help them to know what their rights and their options are, but also to help the community at large understand more about refugees and immigrants. So I believe that that's about all I have for my comments, and I know that we're running short on our time. So I think unless there's any closing comments that Debbie has, we want to say thank you very much again for this opportunity, and we're happy to answer any questions about our social media campaigns, the worship and prayer, and or the convening that we had. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie and Margene. Next, we're going to hear from Archbishop Kurtz of Louisville to share his thoughts on the campaign, and Deacon Lucio about the great things that are happening in that archdiocese.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jim. And it's so gratifying to hear all the good things that are happening up in Boston, by the way. Congratulations on that. Deacon Lucio will be the one who will, in a sense, drill down on a number of the areas that we're talking about. But allow me to begin by mentioning just a few areas that I think have been important pillars, if you will, of our work with Share the Journey. One of the first things is talking about social media. I have a program called Conversations with Archbishop Kurtz. In fact, I think it's Boston TV picks it up also. And one of the 10-minute segments that we did was specifically on the moral and spiritual implications regarding refugees and migrant families. We thought this was very important to give out because it goes on YouTube. There's such a thing sometimes of preaching to the choir. And one of the major areas that I took up on this was, number one, that while, of course, there are political implications, everybody knows that our primary vision as Catholics needs to be the moral and the spiritual. And then we can fit in, if you would, the political realities. So that video, it's about 9 minutes, picked up probably more listeners than any of the others that we've had to date. So I was gratified by that, which was a more generic area. A second thing that was asked in gathering, especially the priests of the archdiocese who are serving in parishes where there's a significant refugee or migrant population and families, they suggested that it would be very important for me to issue a letter that was addressed to many of their families, especially in light of the fear, some justified and some unjustified, but it's real. Fear that families have of separation, of deportation. And so I did that. And then about 6 weeks ago, I visited to one of our parishes, Annunciation in Shelbyville. I had the opportunity at a Spanish Mass to present and read my letter to them both in English and in Spanish. And I thought that was a very important aspect of reaching out to people where they are and giving them the message that the Church wishes to accompany them. The third area that I thought it would be important to talk about was something that I think, Lucio, you'll be talking about, the Days of Dignity in a minute, I know.
Yeah.
I just want to mention something about the first one. And the first Day of Dignity we had just this past Saturday. And we tried to multiply, if you would, today by the people who came to the cathedral, and then through the record and through our tweets, we tried to get the word out dramatically. The theme that I picked up on, very similar to, of course, what our Holy Father is saying, was the theme of you cannot treat a person with dignity unless you look that person in the face. Until you see their face, they become anonymous. And I used as the example the three magi who traveled to see the face of Jesus, as opposed to King Herod, who was capable of slaughtering the holy innocents simply because he never desired to look into a face. And so I think it's going to be very important as we address what I would say the false choices that people are presenting. Well, either I'm compassionate or I seek safety, that we, in a sense, challenge those false choices and begin by the moral underpinnings. The last thing I'll say is a shout out to Catholic Charities of Louisville. And I did this on Saturday. We have had extraordinary response over the last 20 years, really, of our Catholic Charities of Louisville, not only resettling families and ministering to them, but also integrating the families who come to the Louisville area into the life of our church and the life of our society. And I'm very proud of the work that has been done by many before that. So in turning it over now to you, Lucio, Deacon Lucio, I want to say how grateful the Archdiocese has been to the great work that Catholic Charities is doing.
Great. Thank you, Archbishop. And certainly, Archbishop, you have been such a support, a voice, and a presence in this effort and in this campaign in all the different facets of it. And I think that has brought such a visibility of who we are and as a church around this. So we're deeply grateful for that too. So the next slide we put here was about Louisville. If any place, I think the campaign has had a great fit here, because as you see from some of the points we have here, we really have been a city that does embrace overall peoples from all over. Our very historical roots were by people, both Irish and Germans, though I did find a few Italians, who fled famine and religious persecution in the late 18th century. And so the very core of our history is within this. We've had a very supportive mayor and interfaith groups that are very much partners with us on this. So it really has been a very great fit. And I think that's why we have been one of the large sites for refugee resettlement from the USCCB in our resettlement agency that is very obvious. So there's something about this city that has made this campaign really a great place to carry that out. We've had a number of refugee families that we've settled from Asia, Vietnamese, Bhutanese, Bosnians from Europe, Latin America, Mexico, Central Americans, a large Cuban population, sizable Somalis from Africa and Congolese, and there are many of these find support in the wider civic community. And so that has been really great to have the city and many of its departments as a great partner with us. In the next slide, Archbishop Kurtz sort of launched this campaign in September with not only an article in the Record, but a video message that is on the website to really, again, give the voice to this campaign that Pope Francis has called us to. What I do want to say about not only has the great support of Archbishop Kurtz, but the Record. The Record is our newspaper that reaches all 24 counties, 110 parishes, I believe some 150,000 or maybe more people. It's an old medium, but it's read by everybody. And so it's been a great way that we have put this message of this campaign into the reach of our everyday Catholic people throughout our archdiocese. And they have been so supportive, not only in the things that we have written, but the editor has done a great job. Marnie McAllister, her editorials have just reinforced so much of this over these months and continues to do so. The next slide shows you the Record with a somewhat younger picture of me. One of the things we've done monthly is called Share the Journey, where myself and others in Catholic Charities have interviewed some of our refugees, asylees, or immigrants, or some of our people who have worked with them to really share on a personal level the experience, so that it really does become, as Archbishop said, an encounter, maybe not always with the face, but through the Record, through the story, through the experiences shared by those we've interviewed, has really been helpful. And within that, I've gotten often very good response from people saying, oh, I read that. How can I be involved? I'd like to be a refugee youth mentor. There's something about the power of real stories that touch the heart that is really very important. In the next slide, also in the Record, we did a series in November of teaching editorials, or op-eds, if you will, beginning with the Archbishop, situating the context of this issue within Catholic social teaching. We had the executive director of our Catholic Conference of Kentucky speak about migrants and public policy and the advocacy pieces related to that. Our CEO, Lisa DeJaco Crutcher, spoke about how we respond to refugees in terms of our program and what's involved in it, how we meet their needs, the people we involve in bringing the support they need as they are resettled. And then we had Eva Gonzalez, our director of Hispanic ministry, who spoke about some of the pastoral care needs for our immigrant population, particularly of our Latino Hispanic populations. And so this was, again, a wonderful way to do the educative part of this. So having both these twin ways of both personal stories, share the journey, but also teaching our faith through these editorials, I think have been a great way to communicate to all of our Catholic households around this issue. In the next slide, again, just, whoops, I gotta go back to my own one here a little bit. We, again, have had a number of things that have taken place. We had a great task that was done with an interfaith press conference that we did. Our CEO, Lisa, participated with a number of representatives from other faith traditions, especially around the DACA Dreamers issue, and really advocating for legislative solutions to this. The wonderful CCUSA op-ed we made personal adapted and had that published in our Louisville newspaper, the Courier-Journal. Lisa did a great job, our CEO, on doing that and a way of bringing that to our wider community. Some of a record article by our editor around Dreamers. We actually had a number of Dreamers from a small town, I think it was Mount Washington or Springfield, Springfield, Kentucky, who told their stories. It was a wonderful way, again, of making that really alive for people. In fact, it was done so well, I think that was picked up by the Catholic News Service and Crux to further share those stories. I worked with a couple of our priests who were very interested in having Dreamers themselves maybe be available to speak at parishes. So we had a few of them that were willing to go, and we had about 10 or 12 parishes that welcomed them to actually share a little of their story at the masses in these congregations. The next slide speaks about something that I think has been a wonderful adventure or experiment in our diocese, and that is we've tried to weave this Share the Journey campaign while focused on refugees and immigrants. We've sort of broadened it to include some of the others who we accompany and share the journey with, as you'll see in the next couple slides. But all of those whose lives and dignity are affected by so many things today. So we tried to see if there was a way we could weave this together in what we call these days of human dignity. And we also have done that across many of our diocesan offices, working with our pro-life office, worship office, family ministries, diaconate, as well as Catholic charities. And that's been a wonderful experience in inter-office cooperation and promotion. And so in the next slide, you can see in the record, we wrote about that. Initiative aims to promote human dignity, talking about all these different things that we are doing and how they are all tied together. The next slide is, we had as a flyer and poster that shows some of these different days of dignity. The one we began last Saturday, prayer service with Archbishop Kurtz on initiating National Migration Week. This weekend, we're Saturday, Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, which we've had before, but now we're weaving it in with this campaign. Some of the pro-life, Walk for Life, and the pro-life mass around the journey with the unborn and vulnerable moms, mothers, all that kind of thing. We have a Catholic Relief Services Rice Bowl lunch we've done over a number of years, launching that campaign, in which we also invite many of our refugees who come and share their stories and sit at tables with a lot of our Catholic school students, teachers, and parish representatives. And then coming up in March, we've invited a representative from Clinic to come to speak specifically on some of the issues of immigration and DACA, gathering many of our Latino parish pastoral leaders, but also our wider community, to be in solidarity with them around this very delicate issue. So it's been a wonderful experience as we go forward in weaving this together. In the next slide, you can just see some samples of the flyers from these different events, including our Migration Prayer Service Week launch last Saturday, the Martin Luther King celebration, where we share the journey with many who are victims of racism and gun violence, and the Walk for Life, again, as I mentioned, sharing the journey with those affected by that issue. So a great way, I think, to really weave these together. And looking ahead, I already mentioned the one on our journey, Share the Journey Immigration Workshop. We're hoping to do a follow-up with our Faith Formation Department on this issue, with our catechists and others in that area. We do a lot and will continue to do a lot of presentations at parishes, especially having to help let people see how these issues are woven in who we are and what we believe. It comes out of our faith. That's really very important. Another very important day we have, this will be the third annual, again, fitting this campaign. We have an Immigrant and Refugee Day at the Capitol, where we meet with a lot of our legislators. We also invite not only our Catholic population, parishes, but many others in the interfaith community to join us as we make this issue present to our legislators there. Leading up to that, we have a letter writing campaign. We invite people to at a host parish to begin to, we help them in how to do that, why we do that, and letters that will be sent ahead of this day at the Capitol. And we continue to do a lot of refugee camp simulations with our Catholic schools and parishes. One thing we want to do this year is to host kind of right after that camp a Share the Journey dinner to bring some of that experience to the parents and others in that parish. We've invited Archbishop Kurtz to one of our first ones that will happen this spring. So these are just some of the ways that I think we're trying to share the journey, both with education, with stories, with experiences, and with events and gatherings in prayer.
Thank you.
On to San Diego.
And Deacon Lucio, thank you so much. Just one reminder that if you have any questions, you can submit those at any time during the presentation, either through the platform's chat function or clicking raise your hand. So let me, at this point, then turn it over to Bob Moser to introduce Bishop Dolan and the many campaign activities that the San Diego Diocese is engaged in. Bob?
Thank you, Jim. Next slide to San Diego, please. One more. There we go. There we go. Hola from America's finest city. San Diego is very proud to be invited to share our experiences with implementing the Share the Journey campaign in our area. Next. Next slide, please. Today, representatives from the 3 participating agencies in our collaborative effort will address the 3 aspects of our approach: our underlying strategies, our current activities, and future plans. But before that, next slide. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce and to invite Bishop John Dolan to provide the underlying motivation and inspiration for our local campaign. Bishop John?
Thank you, Bob. You know, it's important for us to remember that there's this wonderful buzzword that goes around today in our church. It's called accompanying. We tend to accompany, and yet that sense of accompaniment is so very important as we consider this very important topic of Share the Journey. Just recently, we were at the United States Conference of Bishops, and in our discussion, there was a need to revamp our catechetical ministry, the catechism of the church as it is expressed here in various dioceses. And it was brought to our attention in our region of Lebanon, or the California bishops. Are you able to hear, or are we having trouble? Hello?
We're good.
Hello? Yes. So it seemed as though the concept of sharing the journey through catechesis was so very important that often those who are deported, or those who are refugees, or those who are immigrants or migrants are left out in any catechetical process, and we really need to share the faith journey with them. They're often on the move, and how do we share that faith? And also, how do we learn from those whose faith is born out of their own family on the move? We're in a very privileged setting here in the United States where most of us don't have to move. We may want to move, but we don't have to move. We're not constantly on the journey out of necessity. And I think this is a very important piece for us. And it affects us not only those who are on the move, not only economically, but also in other areas, especially in the area of education and also faith formation. And so to this end, I think the U.S. bishops are starting to look at some form of catechesis for those who are on the move. I think Bishop Robert Barron, who's now a part of this, is really going to have some effect in this area. But my experience in sharing the journey and this very important topic really comes out of a number of introductions that I have had to, say, the Lost Boys of Sudan here in San Diego. We have about 100 members here, and out of about 3,000 in the United States, all of whom had to walk about 1,000 miles from Sudan, and then to Ethiopia, and then to Kenya, and then ultimately found some kind of refugee, or rather experience of life here in the United States, but still not without some post-traumatic stress. And so we have worked here in San Diego through the Southern California Lost Boys and Girls Foundation to assist these wonderful people who are now living here, but still are not as settled as they would like to be. And I think that's a piece of the sharing the journey. The other is that we live here on this border town, and Bishop McElroy has celebrated a few masses and services right on the border with the Archbishop in Munoz in Tijuana, and is separated only by that border fence. And I think that's a very important reality for us in the United States, but is really in our face right here in San Diego. We had wonderful conversations with the Alta, Baja, and Baja California bishops to discuss migration and immigration and those particular concerns for the people right here on the border. We also are privileged to have a wonderful and vibrant Chaldean community here. St. Peter's Eparchy is a very important part of the fabric of San Diego, and they too are dealing with that whole issue of refugee settlement, migration, and immigration issues. I've had also some personal workings with members of Haiti, having to go over there, and I realized that in that particular nation, there's a great hardship, and we have a number of Haitians right in Tijuana who are hoping to find some place here in San Diego or in the United States, and they're still in an unsettled way at this point. But really, as we look at the deported and the refugees and the immigrants and migrants, I think it's important for us to recognize that those who are on the move have a lot to share with us, have a lot of gifts to share with us, and it's really it comes from their own family perspectives. And again, as we go back to our faith, most of us are privileged to be formed in the faith through a formal catechism. We go to a church, we get a catechism. But today, many of our citizens here are on the move, and their catechism comes primarily from their families. And there's some rich gift in that, but at the same time, we need to see how we can help shape those who are on the move through some kind of catechetical and faith formation level. So it's from that perspective that I present this little thought. But I've been really enamored by some of the wonderful writings of, say, Father Mike McAndrew, who speaks on migrant theology. And I think that's a very important piece that has to be brought into this discussion on Share the Journey.
Thank you, Bishop John. Next slide, please. Just a brief overview, a snapshot of our region. As the bishop indicates, our diocese extends the entire length of the border of California with Mexico. We have almost 3.5 million living in San Diego and Imperial counties, with a third of those being Roman Catholic. We're a very diverse community made up of many different nationalities. and we are about almost 1/4 foreign-born in San Diego and over 1/3 in Imperial County. The border between San Diego County and Mexico is the busiest land port of entry in the world. So we are literally one of the major gateways into the United States, and provides us one of the greatest opportunities to be a welcoming force. We're also the largest refugee resettlement site in the state of California and one of the largest in the nation. Now, with that background, I'd like to pass the program over to Aida Bustos, our Associate Director of Communications at the Diocese. Aida?
Thank you, Bob. Well, early on, we at the Diocese and Catholic Charities and CRS decided to join our forces and really leverage our background, our experience, our skill set, our contacts and resources and events of each organization to advance the campaign and its themes. And together we formed some basic strategies. As has been mentioned, we enlisted the active participation of the Bishop's office, with Bishop Dolan really championing our cause from day one. We decided to make the personal stories of immigrants and refugees really the centerpiece of everything we do. Here on the border, as has been mentioned, we're very much a bilingual and multicultural area, so we decided to do all of our basic outreach on this campaign in English and in Spanish, and when it made sense, in other languages. As has been mentioned, we're really using the power of social media to engage many distinct audiences. We've decided to use the diocese's vast infrastructure to promote the campaign, tapping its communication channels, its departments and parishes. We've got 98 parishes, its ethnic commissions, and working through its major events. We also decided to engage our partners to promote the campaign, as well as look for new partnerships. And all the while, we decided that while we were talking about Share the Journey, we would also talk about our own journey, our own organization's work supporting immigrants and refugees. In San Diego, we've been doing this work for decades, and mostly anonymously. And we decided to use this opportunity to talk about the positive stories these communities offer and how their impact has been felt throughout the decades, including sharing these stories with our particular Catholic community. Next slide, please. At the diocese, as has been mentioned also, we introduced the campaign at meetings, such as priest convocations, through pastoral center memos, parish bulletins, our own monthly bilingual newspaper that reaches into thousands of homes, and our diocese's social media platforms. We're using particularly the social media to promote events related to campaign, as well as to link to our partners. Next slide, please. Our newspaper stories not only promote the campaign, but also drill down and tell individual stories. For instance, when we covered Catholic Charities DACA work, we talked about why those migrants are here and the impact the program has had on them.
Next slide.
Combined, all these messages reach many audiences the diocese has, from staff to parishioners to online followers. Next, I'd like to introduce Nadine Toposada, the Director of Refugee Services at Catholic Charities, who will share some of the ways we're implementing this campaign.
Thank you, Aida. At Refugee and Immigrant Services, we have 2 staff members who have been designated to take the lead in promoting and implementing the campaign as part of their work. They advocate for refugees and immigrants. The campaign has a strong social media element, which we're using to promote to our followers and link to others. We created an archive of photographs that we use for our agency's social media posts. We also repost from content shared by others, like Catholic Charities USA. And one of our favorite sites is the Ignatian Solidarity Network, which offers great content, including photographs, stories, and videos. Next slide, please. We also invite parishes to participate in the campaign in a myriad of ways. Parishes are vital to our ability to connect with influential lay leaders and the faithful in the pews. We launched the campaign at the diocese on October 13th with a multicultural mass that was held at Good Shepherd Parish. Good Shepherd Parish is a predominantly Filipino and Hispanic congregation. Bishop Dolan celebrated the mass, and the parish priest, Father Michael Pham, shared the story of his own journey from Vietnam to the United States. In the next slide, you will see a program that we started that invites parishes and other faith-based organizations to tour the Refugee Services Office. During their tour, they learn firsthand what we do. They see our staff in action, and they see why this work is necessary. Visitors hear about what life in the refugee camp is like, the challenges refugees face when they resettle in our region, and how crucial their help is in making that resettlement process smooth and successful. Next slide, please. We also take our message on the road. Staff from Refugee Services visit parishes and hold presentations about the work we do, about the local refugee community, and we invite participants and parishioners to assist refugees any way they can. An example of this is St. Agnes Parish, who raised $8,000 in 2017 to help refugee families. At our office and at parishes, we share stories of how our work has changed lives, and we invite parishioners to participate in the campaign. Next slide, please. St. James Parish organized the Share the Journey Forum one evening. They invited 4 immigrants, members of their parish, to share the story of how they came to the United States and why. They also invited 4 directors of local nonprofit organizations that help immigrants to give context to the migrants' story. Next slide, please. We also participate in events held by parishes. In the Imperial Valley, for instance, the annual Posadas at the Border event was tied to the Share the Journey campaign, which was a great backdrop for the campaign's theme. In the next slide, you'll see one of the ways that we encourage migrants and refugees themselves to share their stories. We invite them to answer questions. We've printed out and we've translated into several languages, so it becomes their voice directly. The questions ask why someone's family or ancestor migrated to the United States, what difficulties they went through to get here, what their hopes and dreams are, and what are they thankful for. We also welcome migrants and refugees to share their stories anonymously on social media. You will see in the next slide our plans of distributing these sheets to parish and community events and to share the responses on our landing page, which I will share more about shortly. These answers are a window into their lives, into their experiences, their hopes, and their dreams. In the next slide, you'll see some of our work with one of the ethnic commissions serving the diocese, the Korean Catholics, who are working on an art project to capture the stories of their community. This art project will be presented in June during the Global Week of Action. In the next slide, you'll also see the result of our partnership with other organizations. We joined forces with the California Immigrant Policy Center to document the story of one of our clients, a refugee from Burma who lived in a camp in Malaysia for 6 years battling leukemia, as he, his wife, and 2 children awaited resettlement to the United States. The documentary shows how the family was finally resettled in 2016, but how their journey is far from over. The father is still battling leukemia, with his best hope to survive being a bone marrow transplant from none other than his brother, a refugee himself, awaiting resettlement to the United States. We premiered the video in San Diego at a forum that was attended by the refugee family, where they got a chance to answer questions and have their voices heard. And we're sharing the video through social media channels, which also raise awareness of the living conditions refugees face along their journey. The final slide, which we're on, that's a depiction of how we felt the need to create our own digital home, where we could share all this information efficiently. Last month was the launch of our own landing page, and the page showcases stories and photos of immigrants and refugees in our region that are produced by us as well as submitted by migrants themselves. The page presents facts about the local migrant and refugee populations, Catholic social teachings, and also has an event calendar. The landing page has a link for those who wish to donate to immigrants and refugees in our region. So this is a glimpse into our recent work, and now I will pass it on to Maria Arroyo from CRS, who will briefly share with you our upcoming plans.
Thank you, Nadine. And so now that we've built a strong foundation, we're working on various fronts to promote the campaign this year. And so I'll share with you just a few of those. As you'll see on the screen, first we plan to have a presence at major diocesan events, and some examples of these events include the Walk for Life, ongoing priest meetings, and the right of election. We'll also be reaching out to the general news media in the region, inviting them to cover the campaign, as Aida has mentioned before. In the Diocese of San Diego, connecting with young Catholics is a priority, and so we'll be inviting the participation of the Office of Youth and Young Adult Ministries into this campaign and collaboration. We'll also be leveraging on the process of the Quinto Encuentro, which many of you have also been a part of, as we have engaged 34 parishes across the diocese and some 1,000 parish leaders. So we'll be reaching out to these parishes and leaders, inviting them to join the campaign as a way for them to live out their missionary discipleship. And then also in collaboration with Catholic for this upcoming Lenten season, we're encouraging parishes and schools to participate in CRS Rice Bowl Faith in Action program. This year, specifically, the program weaves in the theme of encounter and share the journey throughout the 6 weeks of Lent. So we invite everyone to order their free materials on the website. And this concludes our remarks. And on behalf of the 3 organizations promoting this campaign in the San Diego region, we thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, Bob. Thank you for the great work done by the San Diego team. That pretty much brings us to the end of our webinar. So I want to thank everyone who's participated today. We hope it was informative, helpful to you, and ask that you complete the brief survey that we'll send you. This is very helpful feedback to us for these kinds of workshops. So at this point, we'll begin the Q&A portion of the webinar for those who wish to stay on a little bit longer. We do have a few questions that have come in. So how do we want to do that?
Open the line for Roberto Rojas and Raimonda Duval. They have
Okay,
questions. So
there are a couple of questions that came in. The one here. So one question is, I'd like to know if the folks in Kentucky are advocating against anti-sanctuary bills at the Capitol. It seems most states are seeing these. So does anyone from Kentucky want to address that? Did everyone hear the question?
Yes. I'm trying to, but still here.
Let me read the full question. I'm sorry, I was cut off. It said, I'd like to know if the folks in Kentucky are advocating against anti-sanctuary bills at the Capitol. It seems most states are seeing these bills, which compel local law enforcement involvement in the work of ICE. I see state Catholic conferences responding in different ways, some very vocally against, as in the case of Texas and Iowa, and some cautioning against it, but officially neutral. So any thoughts on that from the folks in Kentucky?
Trying to think if I'm aware of anything on the state level. I know in the community, I was at a meeting just the other day with those from the mayor's office where we're working with the chief of police was there on some of these issues and the stances that, you know, they are taking and making it very clear that they do not work for ICE and are not going to carry out anything related to immigration, unless it's something that they would respond to if it was a criminal kind of situation, as they would in any case. I'm not sure if Archbishop, are you aware of anything at the state conference in that? I'm not aware specifically.
Well, this is Lisa DiGiaco-Crutcher, and let me just speak briefly on the issue of legislation. We have heard through the Catholic Conference, which is our lobbying presence, that it's possible that we may see some bills like that in Frankfurt. But I did just want to note, in connection with our Immigrant and Refugee Day at the Capitol, that's not specifically intended to lobby against or for any particular legislation. The purpose of it really is intended just to bring people into the Capitol to have the opportunity to meet individually with legislators. Many of the legislators in Kentucky are from outside metro areas and will not have had the opportunity, particularly to meet with refugees and hear about their experiences. And so it's not really intended as a explicit lobbying day as much as it is an opportunity for people just to be recognized and have the opportunity to come forward and connect with legislators.
All right, another, just a comment, says thank you for the great work and the ideas and events you've shared. This is from Roberto Rojas, so thank you, Roberto. A couple other questions that have come in. One is, in this increasingly polarized political environment, what has been general receptivity of Catholics in particular in your diocese? And that's open to anyone to respond to.
Well, I think, speaking for San Diego, we're really a microcosm of the general population in the United States. You're going to have people who are for and against this topic, and each pastor is going to have to come to that topic from their own angle. But I think most of this is dependent upon how willing are they to listen and literally to share that journey with those who are immigrants and migrants. And we have a long way to go in that area. I think the pastors and the people in the parishes need to be educated on the value and the purpose of everyone who lives within the fabric of our society, including those who are on the move and are clearly on a journey.
Thank you, Bishop. Just one last question that came up from the perspective of the presenters and all the good information that was shared today. What do you think the emphasis of the Share the Journey campaign should be going forward? I guess you could say into the new year.
Well, this is Deacon Lucho. I find in teaching and in preaching, I think it is showing how it is integrated into the core of who we are as Catholics, at least with our Catholic population, that all of this really comes out of the very heart of what we are. I know I had a good response in preaching on this on New Year's Day, tying this issue to the reality of the incarnation that we were celebrating in the Christmas octave, and speaking of that as the great migration of God, the understanding of Jesus as the migrant Son of God who was given refuge in the womb of Mary. And that may sound a little lofty, but I had more people that said, geez, I never looked at it that way. You know, that this is not just some issue that's just strictly a political, social issue, but it is built into our faith. So I think one thing that I do a lot in our communication and in teaching is to show that integration into our doctrines, certainly in Catholic social teaching, but on every aspect of our faith, that when people see the connection, then they're open, I think, to understand why we take a stance on this issue. And the other is related to that is what Archbishop Kurt said, is when people can encounter a faith. And so I think having opportunities for people to hear the stories and meet people who've come through these journeys really touches the heart. I think the more that can happen, I think we will go a long way. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Those are the only questions that we've received. Does anyone want to offer any final comments before we formally close out the webinar?
One little comment I'll offer from my perspective in San Diego is that we're all coming up. It's not just from San Diego, but we all, as Catholics, are coming up to the feast or to Ash Wednesday, which happens to be Valentine's Day, and it's going to be a particular challenge for young lovers on that day. But the reality is that I think in many ways that's a wonderful way for us to embrace Lent with the idea that the heart of Christ is not just a Valentine card upon a poster. The heart of Christ is a living and breathing entity. It's for the entire corpus, the body of Christ, and from that heart of Christ flows his blood, his water. For all, not just for those who live within the body or within the heart of Christ or even in the bosom of Christ, but rather even in the peripheries. And this is what Share the Journey is about, reaching out to those in the peripheries. Where does blood flow? But to the toes, to the peripheries, to every aspect of the body of Christ. And it seems to me that that's where we need to be going within our church. And I think we have a great opportunity with the Share the Journey campaign, but also with the beginning of the Lenten season on the Feast of Valentine's Day. A wonderful, heart-pumping moment.
That's an excellent comment. It reminds me, Bishop, that Cardinal Tagle actually will be a visitor here at the Catholic Relief Services headquarters on that day, that very day. So it ties in beautifully with your comments there, and you will be able to hear from him, and then conversely share with him all the great work that has been presented here today and more. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar. Again, many thanks to all who participated, and particularly the speakers, and wish everyone a wonderful weekend. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless.